Okay, after recording the video of installing the trigger, I loaded it and realized there was no audio, so now I got to do the walkthrough. Pretty much do the usual, go through, strip the upper off the pistol, just go through, clear it out, take your first punch, knock out the rear pin. You can start at the front or the rear, whatever. Pull the pin out, disconnect the trigger spring. I did it using a 1/8 inch punch, just kind of rolled around, fished it out of there. Pretty simple enough to do. And then pop it loose of the trigger bar after the fact. Just showing you the mounting points for the trigger spring. You can kind of hook and loop it around to reinstall it there. I'll show you when we get back to that. Remove the spring or the rear block, makes it a little easier to get to the trigger bar there. Then, as you'll see, the rear block's all one piece. Once you disconnect the trigger spring, pops right out. And then I move on to the main trigger hinge pin. It's one of the 3 pins holding in the front block there. And just to expedite the video, I kind of cut out some of my fumbling around and the hammering of the pins. Then move to the second pin in the front block there. Then it will be the holding pin in the takedown release lever. It's kind of the hardest pin to get to. You can see it through the top, and I'm sure you can pound it through the top, but just to save time, I put a little notch in the bottom side. Just makes it easier to get to and easier to hammer out. I did have better luck hammering it out with a small little pick that I've got. It just pops right loose once you get the pin hammered out. And then just take another punch and tap the cross pin through, and it'll give you some room to pry off the other side of the takedown lever. Very quick and easy, like everything else on tearing this pistol down. Trying to kind of be nice, don't want to mar up the finish on the side of the pin too bad. And pries off easily enough. Mileage will vary on anything you have to try to remove or anything, just due to how new or how many times you've taken it apart. The takedown catch on the slide, make sure you cover that when you're removing the cross pin, because that is spring loaded and will go flying. Pop it all out. The spring is not contained by anything other than the natural recess in the frame that holds it. So you can either pop it out then or pop it out after you take the front block out. And then once you remove the front block, the magazine slide release spring just sits in a little recess in the side of the frame. It's got just a little pinhole that you can't really see in the picture, but it's just got a pinhole that it slots into. So be very careful that you don't lose this. This is what it looks like in case you already did. And it is just a very thin piece of spring wire. Very simple to lose. So, but after that, the whole trigger assembly, the slide release and the trigger assembly all just lifts right out. And I'm not really going to show the video of removal of the trigger. It's just one more pin that I'm pointing out right there that holds the trigger bar to the trigger. So once you get that removed, then you can just pull the trigger loose, be all set. Then after the fact, I decided to remove it just so that I could polish up some bits and pieces on it. For reinstallation, just kind of, it's in a good spot from the beginning, right from the factory. When you get it from Freedom Smith, that's about how far the pin will be hanging out of the trigger when you get it. Do not remove that pin completely. The little safety lever will come free and go flying, I'd assume. I don't know. I haven't removed it. But just hammering it back into place. And then once you get it to where you're happy with it, just take her out, take a look over, make sure you're happy. Then pretty much everything reassembling's just in reverse order of the disassembly. Drop the trigger into place, the trigger bar. Make sure you kind of got it oriented to the top side, as the slide release and everything will go on the bottom side. I've found it easier to kind of hook the spring in as shown there. It's pretty simple to get in, then the front block to hold the spring in place. But make sure you get that spring in there and get it in correctly. Because if it's not in all the way, it'll kind of impede you getting the front block in place. So had to take a pick and kind of pry it down into place with some pressure of the front block on it to get it to all go together correctly. Got to make sure the trigger slides into the gussets in the front block as well. Then I like to put the takedown lever back into place, just because that's kind of the most complicated part. If you got anything in the way, you can pop everything back loose pretty quickly. Just kind of hold it in place in the downward position. On the crossbar, when you're installing it, be careful that you do so correctly. The shorter end of the lever goes facing up. If you don't get it in there correctly, and it'll be in the way when you go to reassemble, and you'll have to take it back apart to get it back on there. And then just pound the pin back into place on the takedown bar there. I can, if you get it lined up correctly, you can get it with just a pair of pliers to press it into place. There isn't really any whole lot of jostling that goes on with that particular part, but you still want to make sure that the pin's in place correctly so that you don't end up having a catastrophic failure while you're out at the range or in the field. And then after that, you can either put the front pin in the front block, or you can put the slide release in. I had a pretty easy time getting the spring back around the top side. Just kind of used a little pick tool to fish it out from underneath up onto the top of the slide release bar. And then after that, you can put the trigger pin back in place, and that'll hold everything there in place. Couple of love taps, and then make sure you got it centered. Not positive it'll make a ton of difference in operation, but just one of those little things that you do out of habit. Make sure the pin's centered. Then slide the rear block in. Make sure you fish the trigger bar into the proper position there. And then before you completely get the rear block in place, I found it easiest to hook the trigger spring onto the trigger bar first. Then you hook it onto the front block or the rear block. But if you don't fully seat the rear block, it leaves you some more play in the trigger bar, so you can get a grip on it easier with the spring. And then replacing the spring in the rear block, just kind of fished around and hooked it back in place there. Pretty easy enough to do. And then just kind of double check it to make sure that you properly have it hooked once you get it in there. And it pretty much falls right into place. It's got a very, very well defined groove and a hole in the bottom side for the head of the spring. Want to make sure you get it in there completely. And once you get that seated, just make sure, like I said, making sure that you got it all completely seated very well. And for the most part, you got a working pistol, lower end. Then replace the pin in the rear block of the pistol. Once you replace that one, replace the pin all the way in the front of the front block. I tend to leave those out until I'm about finished, just to make sure that everything's set and I don't end up having to take it all Once you get the pistol all set, get it back reassembled, get the double check it, check the trigger for action. Everything works well. Overall, it's got about a 3 to 4 millimeter total trigger pull. The initial millimeters about all of the take up on it, and then everything after that's the brake. So kind of makes the trigger feel a little bit heavier initially till you get used to it, because there's no travel left in it. So once you get used to that, you're good to go. And just sit there, cycle through it a few times, make sure everything works well. And there you go. Have a nice day.